A man remains behind bars tonight after leading DPS troopers on an overnight chase throughout Corpus Christi. Sergeant Nathan Brandley telling us that DPS says it was just before 3 this morning. Troopers tried to pull over a suspected drunk driver near Old Brownsville Road in Saratoga, leading troopers on a chase almost circling the city. They eventually laid down spike strips to blow out the tires, and the vehicle came to a stop at Southport near Brandon Street. The driver, 23-year-old Corey Jacob Robertson, was then arrested. He's facing charges of evading arrest, possession of a controlled substance, and driving while intoxicated.